No, I'm just putting in the chat. I'm just putting up the tasting order, so because I'm sure we'll get asked that. So,
that's that's the first question that comes up always. Yeah. This is sort of like out of the norm for us because we primarily are bourbon and rye uh, folks. But one of the MOs of the Prime Barrel is that we're trying to get people to expand their palates, and we've been pretty successful with some folks. Others, venturing out here and there and trying to figure out if anything besides those two expressions are for them. And if they find something that they like, that's great. That's job well done by us. And if not, that's also well, because then at least people can say, "Hey, I tried it, and that's certainly not for me." So either way, they win, and either way, we win. All right. Well, it is 8 o'clock on the East Coast. Let's get started. I'll introduce Raj. So. Again, as I said before, this is a departure from us. Normally, we do these things for bourbon and rye, but I'm super happy that enough of you took a chance on a single malt and an Indian single malt at that. I personally love the brand. I've had a couple of those expressions before. I'm looking forward to you guys trying it today. So Raj is someone that founded the brand. That's his brainchild. Obviously, he's very proud of it. So I'll let him introduce the brand. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll get to the whiskeys. Raj,
thank you. Thank you. Thanks. My name is Raj Sabharwal. I am one of the owners and founders of Glass Revolution Imports. And so we are a US-based importer of spirits. Amrut was the first product that we ever started importing, and that was going on 15 years. So we took a chance back then because funnily, when my partner, I grew up in Canada, and my partners were handling Amrut in Canada, and they called me and said, "We have this Indian whiskey that wants to get into the US, and are you interested?" And my first reaction was, "What do you mean Indian whiskey? There is no good Indian whiskey." All the time when my brother and I would go to India and visit family, my cousins would invite us over and pull out whiskey, and I was like, "What is this stuff?" But we drank it because there was no other choices. For those of you who don't know, India is the largest consumer of whiskey in the world. Yes, there's 1.4 billion people, but if you discount people who don't drink for religious reasons, the female population is just starting to appreciate spirits and wine. So that's a small percentage. But you still have probably 300 to 400 million people that consume alcohol. There's 600 million liters a year that are consumed in India of alcohol in general. And people go, "Well, why whiskey and why in India?" Well, you got to blame it on the Brits, because during the British rule, the drink of choice by the officers and the elite was whiskey. And for a lot of people to sort of meld in and enjoy it, they started drinking whiskey, but it was mostly the upper echelon that was drinking it because it was not affordable by the majority of people. So in the late 70s, early 80s, some of the British UK companies came in and started making more lighter style whiskeys by taking a neutral spirit, which is mostly made out of molasses, and then adding some imported whiskey to it. So the whiskey either came from Canada, Scotland, or Ireland, and it's called IMFL, Indian Made Foreign Liquor. So if it's made to be like something, you can't call it Scotch, obviously, because it's made in India and it doesn't fit the Scotch category. So it's all in the category of IMFL. But in 2004, Amrut was the first one to release and export single malt whiskeys, and they started in the UK. And when I say single malt whiskeys, they actually follow the Scotch Whisky Association regulations. So all of the whiskeys you're going to try tonight, except for the rye, are made out of 100% malted barley. It's Indian barley, except the peated ones I'll explain are different. And it's pot distilled, matured in oak barrels for a minimum of 3 years. So following all of the Scottish regulations and adhering to that. When Amrut did it, they took a big gamble. They weren't sure if there would be an appreciation for it, especially launching it in the UK, which is the home of whiskey, and trying to break in there. The first year in 2004, they sold 100 cases in all of the UK, so 600 bottles. And now, we in the US alone, we're the biggest export market for Amrut. Last year, we sold 15,000 cases.
Oh, wow.
So it's continuing to grow and appreciation for it. And what it's done is opened up a whole category of Indian single malts, because now you have 4 or 5 different brands that are in the marketplace, and more to come. There are more distilleries in India than there are in Scotland, but only currently about 24 of them actually make single malts, and there's 6 more that are being built. So there'll be 30 distilleries just making single malt whiskeys. 4 of those new distilleries are owned by Diageo, 1 by Pernod, and the other one is, sorry, I'm trying to think of it's a Scottish, small Scottish producer, and they just built, or they're in the midst of building a distillery. They're doing one in China as well, so there's a lot going on. So let's, I'm sure you're thirsty, so if you haven't already, grab the first one, which is the Amrut Classic Single Malt. It's the one in the yellow canister. If you don't have it,
I have to say, the presentation on these things is pretty neat. We normally have to create our own kits, and they come in these,
right.
Still fancy
minis,
bottles, but this is very nice.
The minis are exact replicas of the full bottles. They're the tins and everything else are exactly the same. But what you're pouring in your glass is the classic Indian single malt. It is 100% Indian barley. The barley grows up in the north in Punjab and Rajasthan. It is a 6-row barley as opposed to 2-row, which is normally what's used in Scotland. So 6-row, smaller granules, gives you a lower yield, but gives you a richer distillate. It naturally has higher sugar content and higher nutrients, but lower carbohydrates. So that's why you get a lower yield from it. But it does produce a richer distillate that comes out of it. So this has been aged in combination of about 95% ex-bourbon barrels, and they use about 5% virgin American oak. There is a small amount of sherry matured whiskey in there as well. These are some of the changes that Shok, who is the current head distiller, when he took over distilling 4 years ago, he made some of the changes to the original recipe for what it was. So, and I see the question is coming out as how old are Amrut's whiskeys? I am going to then, how do we manage this extreme heat? Let's taste this one and taste another one before I answer that question. But that is certainly one question that I knew was going to come up. But I want you to be able to appreciate what's in your glass before we get and bias you by getting into the age and maturity and everything else. Like that. So Amrut does not do their own maltings. They used to. They still have a malting floor at the distillery, and they do some malting there, but the demand right now is so high that they actually have a malting facility in New Delhi that does all their malting for them, all for the standard barley, the Indian barley. The barley, as I said, grows up in the north. It comes down, it's malted in Delhi, shipped to the distillery. Amrut's based in Bangalore, which is in the south central part of India. It's 3,000 feet above sea level. So it's not on either coast. So it has a climate that is lower in humidity, but it's quite varying in temperature. So in the winter, you get about a 70, 75 degree average temperature. In the summer, it's 120, 125 degrees. And the humidity in the winter is about 40, 45%, and about 75% in the summer. So it continues to be dry all year. And you can see the temperature swings. And in fact, there are periods in the middle of the night when the temperature will take a big drop and then rise up again. So you're getting constant expansion and contraction of the barrels while it's sitting there.
And this is 46 ABV, right? So 92
Correct.
proof.
So 92 proof, non-chill filtered, no color added to it. It's all natural. And
Interesting.
So
on the nose for me was like I thought this was going to be much sweeter, but on the palate it's anything but. It's it's on the spicier end of things, and it has a pretty long finish for me.
right. Well, we like to say it because it's from India, it's got to have some spice in it. But that's just I think it's the environment. It's the obviously from the barrels as well. You're getting some of those spicy notes coming in there from the oak, but there's not enough good quality of oak, or not enough oak that's grown in India, not enough quality of Indian oak to use, and that's why they're getting American oak. And they do use some French oak and Spanish oak, obviously, if they're using sherry or port barrels or any other kind of different kind of barrel that they're using. So,
understood.
So I'm seeing some good comments on this. Oak on the palate, interesting flavors. Some people said long finish, and there is a lot going on. You can see that it again, it really develops in the palate when you put it on, and it doesn't have, I like to say it doesn't have that burn that you get. It's really well balanced with the use of the oak in there.
Interesting thing is about these tastings is because there's so many people participating, everybody has their own palates and everybody has their own preferences. And that's one of the challenges of kind of running a whiskey club, to be able to please that many people, which I've learned is impossible. But what's interesting about these tastings is because our crowd, they're very upfront and they'll tell you if the whiskey is not agreeing with them. And so I'm kind of happy to see that people are appreciating this, especially, a lot of people on the call are tasting this for the first time.
Well, that's fair. I think, I like to have honesty and comments about that. Not every whiskey is going to appeal to everyone. So it's good to have different ones. Somebody asked about new oak use. Yeah, I mentioned this before. They use about 5% new American oak, 95% ex-bourbon. And in the past, they've tended to get barrels from Jack Daniels and Buffalo Trace. That's their preferred ones. You will see very soon a release from Bardstown Bourbon Company that is a release that has been matured in ex-Amrut barrels. I think they'll be releasing it sometime in February or March. So Amrut sent a bunch of barrels down to Bardstown. Bardstown sent barrels over to Amrut to use in maturation. And Bardstown took those barrels and put their bourbon in there to finish it. And the label is going to say finished in Amrut Indian single malt barrels. So that'll be quite interesting when that comes out. And I was able to taste some of it, and it's quite spectacular. So any other comments about the single malt? Generally, everyone seems to
what's the typical price point for these?
The single malt is 60, 65.
Okay.
Obviously it varies across the country, but yeah, that's generally where it was. Like everything else, we haven't raised the prices that much over the years. I think when this first came out, it might have been closer to 50 or 55, but obviously the costs of everything have gone up, so that's continued to go up.
Interesting. What are your top markets in the United States and outside as well, actually?
So in the US, our biggest markets are California, Texas. They tend to go like neck to neck. New Jersey, Illinois, let's see, New York, next would be Connecticut. New Jersey and Connecticut are the same. And then Georgia. Those are our top 5 or 6 markets. But we're in 46 states. So it does sell everywhere else. Currently, Amrut is available in about almost 50 countries. The plan is in the next couple of years, to increase to 75 countries. The demand domestically for Amrut in India is 5 times more than they can supply. It's a funny story, when Amrut was first launched in 2004, Neil Jackdale, who was the managing director, the patriarch of the company, said we have to export this. We can't sell it domestically, because he figured that the domestic appreciation for single malts in India would not work, and people would not be interested in it. So it was all developed as an export-only product. And then in 2009, 2010, Amrut started getting all kinds of awards and notoriety. And so people would call the distillery up and say, where can I buy this? And they would say, well, you have to leave the country. You have to buy it abroad. You can't get it here. So obviously there was a demand for it. And now, like I said, the demand domestically is 5 times more than they can supply. The distillery originally was putting out about 300,000 liters a year. And they built a new distillery next to the first one on the same site, which increased the capacity to 1 million liters of alcohol per year. And they're just about to put in another spirit still in the original distillery, which will add about another 200,000 liters. But that's all they can do. There's no more room. So if they want to expand beyond that, they can't even build a distillery within the state where Bangalore is. They'd have to go to another state to be able to do that.
Yeah. All right.
But let's pour the cask strength single malt. So that's in the blue container. That's 61.8%. So it's exactly what you just had, but it is the cask strength version of it. I tend to drink all of these neat. You might want to put a little bit of water into it. It's up to you, but I would certainly ask that you try it first neat, and then put a little water in if you want to open it up and have it.
And it's 61.5 or 8, I can't
0.8,
see.
61.8. Yeah. So 123.6. And what I want to come across on this one is even though it's that higher alcohol, you'll find how well it's balanced with the oak and the barrels, and how rich and flavorful it is. Somebody said buttery, and it is rich and buttery. It has a lot of texture. Texture is one that a lot of people don't pick up on texture in spirits when they're tasting it, but when you get that sort of mouth coating and that richness and that heft, to me, that's texture. So this is, again, one of the core lines, 100% Indian barley. It is, as I said, the cask strength version of the first one you had. A lot of people are getting a lot of positive comments about it being phenomenal. Again, it's very easy to drink. It's a rich distillate. I think the nice thing is that it's even though it's that cask strength, you can enjoy it the way it is, and it also gives you a lot more appreciation for the flavor profile of Amrut single malt, because it's nothing else has been done to it. It's the core off there. So all of the other special releases that they've done have all been based off of this.
Interestingly, if you compare this one to non-cask strength one, there are like stark differences, and it's the same, distillate. Like, to me, the nose on the first one, it was a lot brighter. On this one, it's that heft that you're talking about. It's more concentrated. The palate for me is also like more musty. Kind of like, it reminds me of like a dusty library, but then it kind of opens up. All of these notes versus the first one. It's the first one is a great for sort of like a beginner, and then I think the second one is more suited for this group.
Yeah, and I think you do get more appreciation for it, but obviously the higher alcohol in there is going to mask some of the nose, some of the flavor profiles on the nose, but certainly on the palate you'll pick it up. And once I like to start with a lighter alcohol whiskey, and that'll sort of coat your mouth before you move on to the next one, and so you're used to alcohol coming in there.
Mm-hmm. Very creamy. Yeah.
Do you know if they have a tasting room in Bangalore, or can you go visit the distillery? Unfortunately,
They
no.
do not right now. It is every state in India has different rules and regulations. In fact, there's 4 states that are totally dry. You can't buy or consume, like you can consume, but you can't purchase alcohol in those states. And the state is one of those that didn't allow visitors, didn't allow a visitor center, but Amrut has been working with them, and they are building one now. So later this year, it should be operational. So they will start welcoming visitors. The only problem is that they can take you on a tour, but you can't sample anything there because there is literally a customs agent, excise agent, that has an office right in the building and watches everything that goes on. So when we are taking barrel samples out, we have to sort of sneak them out off there. But hopefully they'll be able to overcome that as some of the rules change. But right now, they welcome visitors. You have to prearrange that. So if anybody's going, reach out to me. I can arrange that. But there's no official tours that go on right now, nor is there a visitor center.
Perfect. Thanks.
That will happen. It's not like I know Goa, where Paul John is based, that is more wide open and more appreciative of allowing distilleries to open and do tastings and do events and things like that. So, hey, somebody asked me earlier about the maturation of this and age, etc. I'm just going to throw out there how old do people think this is? You've tried the first 2. Just throw out numbers and let's see what people think.
4 to 5 years.
Okay. Anybody else?
3 to 4.
3 to 4. 7. I see a 7. Climate's deceiving. 8. 6 to 7. 5 to 6. Man, you guys have a very good palate. So this is 4 to 5 years. But the climate, as some of you have picked up on, because of the heat and the dryness, they tend to lose 10 to 15% a year angel share. So an average of about 12%. So if you think about it, 5 years, 50% of your barrels evaporated. And because it's drier, they lose more water. The alcohol strength actually goes up. So Ashok, who's the head distiller, likes to say that Amrut's the missing link between Scotland and Kentucky, because making product that you would make in Scotland, but it's maturing like it does in Kentucky. So you're getting that alcohol, more water loss, and the alcohol strength going up, which is very similar to what happens in Kentucky or Texas, some other places in the U.S. that are fairly dry climate-wise. The entry proof on these are 62.8, and that is relevant. I will bring that up later as to why that typical entry proof of 62.8 or 125.6 is important. Okay. All right. Any other questions about this one or the first one we had, the first 2? All right. Someone's saying that in one of the 4 states that don't carry Amrut. Jesse, which state are you in?
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania.
Actually, Amrut is available in Pennsylvania. It's available on special order. It's not available.
It's not on the shelf.
It's not on the shelf. It was on the shelves, and a number of years ago, in the lovely PLCB decided to delist it, and we're trying to get it back on the shelf. But it is available. You can go into your local fine wines and spirit store and order it, and it can be shipped to you, or you can contact our distributor in PA, who are in Pittsburgh, and you can purchase it from them, and they can ship it to you. We are available in Kansas, Ohio. We are not. Don't get me started in Ohio. We used to be in Ohio, but Ohio is a bit of a mess to deal with. So I'm looking at ways to get back in there because we did really well in there. Virginia gets single malt and fusion, not only fusion. They have both of them. And in the past, they've ordered some other ones, the peated. We had I think one special release that was in Virginia. Again, it all depends on what the state won't order anything unless there's a demand for it. So if somebody walked into one of the stores in Virginia and said, I want this, the state would bring it in. So we do have a constant supply. Yeah, I mean, like I said, dealing with the US is like dealing with 51, 52 different countries. Every state is different to deal with, and it's some cases very difficult. They don't make it easy to do that. So
Raj, you've mentioned that Amrut has played like a pivotal role in putting Indian whiskey on a map.
Yeah.
And people beginning to think of India as one of the regions, whiskey producing regions. What were the initial challenges you faced gaining recognition internationally, not necessarily inside? Or I think you've mentioned it was actually the other way around, right? You started outside and then went inside.
Yeah. So they started as export only. I mean, the UK was where they first launched, and then into Europe and Canada, a few other places. I can't remember exactly where. And then 2009 into the US. And it was the biggest challenge was trying to convince people that this was a real single malt whiskey, that it wasn't it wasn't one of the typical whiskeys you get in India, which are made from a neutral molasses spirit with some grain alcohol added to it. So we purposely did not target the Indian diaspora in the US because A, they would have never heard of it. B, their reactions would have been the same as my initial reaction was, what do you mean Indian whiskey? There's no good Indian whiskey. So we basically targeted the whiskey aficionado, whiskey connoisseur, some higher end whiskey retailers. What really helped is when Fusion, which we're going to try in a little bit, won World Whiskey of the Year, was named third best whiskey in the world in the Whiskey Bible, started winning a bunch of other awards, and that really put Amrut on the map. And the demand for Amrut started to climb, and why it's available in so many countries, and India itself domestically will be their largest market. They just have to they got to balance meeting the global demand as well as domestic demand. So they do have some other brands whiskey that is only available in India to sort of satisfy the Indian market until the other things come out. So that was the biggest challenge. I mean, it's sort of like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when Japanese whiskey was introduced, friends of mine who sell it had to convince people that it was not made from rice, which is kind of ironic because now you have so many Japanese whiskeys that are made from rice. Right. But they had to do that, and I mean, look at Japanese whiskey today. It's just the prices on it are ridiculous. So for something totally different now, we're going to look at the rye, which is not in one of the canisters. It's probably in a separate bottle.
Yep.
Okay. So the rye, if you try to look for it in the shops, it'll be in a package like this. It is called rye single malt whiskey, and the reason it's called single malt whiskey is that it is 100% malted rye. So in Scotland, you could not call this single malt because single malt by Scottish regulations has to be 100% malted barley. But rye, and you're allowed to call it single malt rye. So this is the second release. You'll see on the back of every label, actually, Amrut has the batch number and the bottling date. So this is batch number 2, and it was bottled September 2023. This is the last time that they're going to make this. For those of you who have worked with rye or know anything about rye is very difficult to work with. It gums up all of the equipment when you're using it and you're going through the process. So it's very costly to go and take care of that. So there's, even in the US, there's only a few single 100% malted ryes. I know Old Portrero does one. I think there's a couple of others that do it, but again, you don't get a lot of 100% malted rye.
I'm very impartial to malted rye. I tend to gravitate towards that mash bill specifically, and I've been nosing this since yesterday, as I mentioned. And Brandon and I got on a phone too. And to me, what this reminds me of cream soda.
Interesting. Yeah, what you'll notice, it doesn't have a big spicy nose on it, right? There is some spice down below. If you take a deep breath of it, deep inhalation, you'll get that spiciness on there, but it's not like big rye notes that you would necessarily expect. The rye for this is Northern European rye. It grows in Denmark. And then the rye goes to a maltster in England, where it is malted and then shipped to Amrut for production. This was matured for about 6 years, all in ex-bourbon barrels. And again, bottled at 100 proof. No water added, non-chill filtered. Sorry, no color added. Obviously, water's been added. Bring it down. There you go. Somebody's getting pineapple on the palate, tropical fruit. Yeah, I think there is definitely orchard fruit on there. Apple blossoms. And if you sip it and you let it sit on your tongue, you'll notice some of that spiciness starting to come out there. But still, it's not like a huge spice bomb. It's not like, a lot of people who appreciate that or look for that in a rye whiskey, you're not necessarily going to get this. Yeah, a lot of the Amrut special releases tend to be bottled at 50%, 100 proof. Okay, so somebody's putting up. We should just put a pricing on there from for the different things. So all of these are available, or they will be available.
Yes, they are all available. Some are in limited quantities, like this rye.
Yeah.
But others have pretty good stock. Yeah.
Yeah, we have some rye left. We were allocated 200 cases, so 1,200 bottles for the US. But certainly on the mouth, you get that spiciness, you get that rye quality on there.
You do.
I think it is some people saying juicy fruit, everything else. It is mouth watering.
Yes, it is.
It has a nice medium long finish, and you get different flavors developing up through there. I think as the alcohol dissipates, you're getting a little bit of oakiness. You're picking up some of the wood notes. I don't know if anybody else is getting that, but I think it has a lot going on. There's the front of the palate. Again, somebody mentioned juicy fruit. You're getting those fruit, like nice, rich fruit flavors at the front of your palate.
I know you've mentioned you guys not going to make this again. Was there any thought given to making this at cask strength at all?
They did do a cask strength release. It was a single barrel release of it. It was 60%. So 120 proof. And they also have done some of their single malt finished in the rye barrels, and that were released again as single barrel releases. There was a couple that came to the US that were available. Yes, the rye is from Denmark. I do not know which variety of rye it is, but I can find out and let you know. Oh, there is rye that's grown in India, but the problem is, and one of the big challenges, again, originally when Amrut started distilling, was there was some backlash because the population and a lot of people didn't want grain that would be used for feeding people to be taken away and used for distillation. So it was going to reduce the amount of grains that were available to feed the population. This particular barley that Amrut uses for the single malt is a varietal that was developed by the Indian Agriculture Commission, and it is only used for distilling and brewing. So it is not a barley that is used for consumption. So Mike threw out a message here, add the cask strength and rye, and he'll order it. So that's good to hear. All right. Any other comments about the rye before we move on to the next one?
Very unique. I'm glad you guys put this out.
Yeah, I thought, because I know we went back and forth between this and the triple distilled, and I decided to go with this because I thought, given your group, they might be more inclined to like this than the triple distilled. Although the triple distilled is fabulous.
And I honestly generally feel like, and again, this is personal opinion, that rye is a lot more, it has more of a gamut in terms of different flavors than bourbon does. Single malt is actually much the same, and there's a humongous gamut in single malts, but that's a conversation for a different day.
No, I agree with you. I mean, that's, I've always said that to me, bourbon is in most cases very homogeneous. You got, once you add that big corn element in there, it's going to have that characteristic regardless. The only variations you're going to have is whether you put more rye in there, you put more wheat in there, so you make it softer, you make it spicier, but otherwise it's all pretty much going to be the same, and which is fine. I mean, that appeals to a population and people like that, but I tend to like things that have more variety and more span of flavors that you can find. So I'll gravitate towards single malts because of the different varietals you can find, different expressions you can find.
Last thing I'll say about the rye, we can move on. I strongly do enjoy this rye, and I know I might be in the minority. I don't know. So if you guys do like it, put it in the comments. But what I think this is missing for me personally is the finish. The finish is quite short on this for some reason. All of that action happens on the palate, and you're right. It's mouth-watering. It's fruity. It's bursty. But to me, finish is not quite there.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, but we're getting like, some people are saying it's the best rye they've had in a while.
Yeah, I saw that.
Favorite so far. So yeah, it's that's good. I think at cask strength it would be unreal. Unfortunately we'll never get a chance to try it. There might be some around. I think Le Maison Whisky in France may have done a single barrel of it, but I don't know if it's still around or not. Certainly, this is it.
What is the typical yield in your single barrels? Because there are secondary casks, obviously, right? And so they're hold a lot more stuff.
Yeah, well, so it depends on a lot of the evaporation. I mean, we have had as little as 90 bottles out of a standard American barrel, and as much as probably 150. Maybe 180 tend to be the average. 150 is probably what the average yield is from a barrel. And that is that's when it's bottled at 60%. And we, if you get a sherry butt or port pipe or something, you're going to get more. You're going to get almost 350 to 400 bottles coming out of that.
Okay.
But don't forget, I mean, we did a 9-year-old peated port barrel for the DC market, and I think that was 360 or 390 bottles that came out of that, and that was 9 years old, and it was bottled at 120 proof.
Got it. All right.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move slowly into the realm of peated whiskeys, and the first one is the Fusion. That'll be in the brown tin. Fusion is Amrut's flagship whiskey. That's really what put them on the map. So that was released in 2009. That year, Malt Maniacs named it the best daily dram. Whiskey Advocate or Malt Advocate back then called it best world whiskey. Whiskey Bible, third best whiskey in the world, etc. And it continued to win awards. So the reason this is called fusion is it is 75 to 80% of the whiskey you had the cask strength single malt, and then 20 to 25% of the peated single malt, which we're going to have after this. So the two whiskeys are made separately, matured separately, and then they'll take the components and put them into what's called a marrying barrel for it to mature. It'll stay in the marrying barrel for about 6 months, and then is bottled at 100 proof. Some people are saying that peated scares me. Other people are saying excited for the peated expressions. Yeah, I think people do get scared off by the concept of peat, because a lot of times people think it is peat like you would have from Islay, so Lafroig, Lagavulin, Ardbeg, etc. But the peated barley that is used here, so there is no, as I said, there's no peat in India, so the barley gets peated in Scotland to Amrut specifications. It's bottled, malted at Baird Malting in Inverness, and then it is malted and then shipped to the distillery for use. Amrut has occasionally taken Indian barley and peated that using at their own Thor maltings, and they did that for a single barrel, which we got for the US, and that was released a number of years ago. But again, it was something that we only had 90 bottles of from the barrel, so it went pretty quickly. And they have found a maltster now in Delhi who is bringing peat in from Scotland and malting the Indian barley to do that. So Paul said I've only had Lafroig and Talisker. Fusion is so much more approachable. Well, it's funny because I was going to say if you want to compare fusion to something, it would be sort of like Talisker, or maybe older versions of Bamor, or a Jura. Highland Park tends to be a little peated, so that's the kind of range it's going to be in. It's certainly not like your full blown Islay peated whiskeys. It's a nice introduction to peat. It's a nice way to introduce peat to people. Depending on how susceptible you are at picking up notes, you may pick up the peat notes right off on the aromas, but some people, it takes them a while. You have to actually sip it, and you'll notice the peat at the back of the throat, back of the palate. You get that smokiness, that rich sort of earthiness coming at the back of the palate.
Reminds me a bit of Highland Park, a little bit.
Yeah, slightly. I mean, Highland Park tends to be a little less peaty than,
right,
unless you're going to their fully peated whiskeys like Longrow and stuff. But yeah,
I mean, I can see why this would win awards, because for those exact reasons, that it's a nice bridge to peat,
absolutely.
if you want to dive up the deep end, as they say. But at the same time, it retains all the flavors, and it could be a great winter whiskey, or really any day whiskey. It just has a lot of flavors.
I think the fusion is when we move towards the full peated whiskeys, those will probably lend themselves to being more of a winter dram, or sitting around the fire kind of dram, or having with your cigar sort of thing if you want to have. Okay, Amelia's asking about a single master distiller. Yes. So the original master distiller retired, I think about 5 years ago. He is now working with Indri, which is another Indian distillery, and released some stuff. But Ashok, who was responsible for really building the brand, he He was the international sales director, but along the way, he's an engineer by trade. So along the way, he really learned how to distill. He spent a lot of time in Scotland with different distillers and different methodologies of distilling. So Ashok started, he became the master distiller 4 years ago. So a lot of these expressions that you're tasting now, as I mentioned earlier, the single malt and the cask strength single malt, the Ashok tweaked the recipe a little bit. So he's added a little bit of sherry distillate to it. There is a small, very hint of peat in there. You might pick it up or might not pick it up. It's about 1% in there. But he did some of those changes, and the way he's distilling has made a difference. Certainly the new distillery has made a difference too for what he's doing. But Ashok is the master distiller. He is responsible for a lot of the unique creations from Amrut, like Spectrum, if you've heard of, or Narangi or Kadabam. Any of those were things that Ashok was responsible for. And so he does travel a lot. He was just here in October, and I get to spend a week with him in Japan next month. We're both going to be there for the World Whiskey Forum. So that'll be fun. And then I think he's coming back into the US in April. For the whole month of April, he'll be in Texas, and then probably back in the East for October this year.
You mentioned some of those limited releases that Amrut does. Can you touch a little bit more on that? Like, what's the vision behind them, and are they just your experimental line?
Yeah, so some have been experimental. The nice thing is, since Amrut's a family-owned distillery, they have the luxury of being able to do what they want. And so they have experimented. They've done some things. Most of them have been successful. There's been a couple of things that haven't worked out. So they've said, okay, well, we learned from that. There was a release called Intermediate Sherry, and there's one called Porta Nova, and both of those, they start off with the cask strength single malt, then it goes into sherry barrel, and then goes back into bourbon barrel. So that's why it's called intermediate sherry. The sherrying approach is in the middle of the process, so you still get those Amrut flavors. Porta Nova is the same, but it's in port rather than sherry, and that's quite a rich whiskey. But again, those are only made. We only get one release of those a year if we're lucky. So they've done, as far as single barrels done, there's a release called Atma, which will look like this. So if you ever see these red tins with Atma and the elephant on them, these are single barrels of Amrut that I select, that we release just for the US market. And in that line, we have done Virgin American oak. We did a Virgin French oak. We did a Virgin Swedish oak. We've done Fino Sherry, Madeira, Marcella. I'm trying to think of what else. Port, peated port, so a variety of different ones. And those, we get anywhere from 190, as I said, 90 bottles to maybe 150 out of a standard barrel. And then if we get from a porter sherry barrel, we're going to hit 350 plus, 350, 360 bottles coming out of there.
Got it.
And then Spectrum, and I mentioned that. So Spectrum was, and Ashok had this brilliant idea of, he wanted to get these different flavor profiles. And he said, well, I don't want to move the whiskey from barrel to barrel, but what if we were able to create a barrel that was made up of different wood types? So he called up his guy does barrels from him in Spain, and said, hey, I want to do this. Is that possible? And the person said, well, let me think about it and get back to you. And he called him back up and said, yeah, we can do that. So what they actually did was take barrels of sherry, French oak, Spanish oak, New American oak, and ex-bourbon, and took the barrels apart, put the staves together to create a barrel that incorporated the 5 and then the 4 different types of wood, and then aged the whiskey in there. So it's quite unusual, because if you think of it, if you've ever looked at French or sherry staves, wood staves, they're thicker. So if you looked inside the barrel, it would almost look like cogs of a wheel, because you get the American oak being thinner and its French oak being thicker. So there are different steps that go into the barrel. And then they obviously had to cut the size down so the staves would all be the same size. And then they put, I think on one head was an American oak and the other head was French oak. So that was quite unique. I don't know anybody else who's done that. They've obviously, some bourbon producers do put wood staves into the barrel, but that's only for a certain period of time. They're not fully maturing the spirit in a mixture of different woods in the barrel. So that is something that is unique to Amrut, and they obviously own that whole concept. Narangi was we're coming back. Whenever it comes in, it sells out like crazy. So we are getting a new release of that this year. That was Amrut. Some of you might have picked up. It has some orange notes to it when you tasted the single malt and the cask strength single malt. So Ashok wanted to enhance those orange flavors. Now, you cannot add flavor to whiskey, but you can certainly have a barrel that has been flavored before you put the new make into it. So they got barrels of sherry that still has sherry in it. They sent orange peels from Indian oranges. They're small oranges. They tend to have almost like a greenish orange skin color. And they sent about 2 kilos of the orange peels down to have them placed into the sherry, into the barrels, into the sherry itself, and left them for 2 to 3 years for the sherry to pick up the orange flavors and flavor the barrel. And then the sherry was taken out of there, and then the barrels were sent to Amrut, and they filled it with their single malt to mature the whiskey in those special barrels. And that's called Narangi, and it has real notes of orange in there. So that's quite unusual, and that will be available probably in March, towards the end of March. We'll get it coming in. Again, it'll be a limited release. We're getting 400 bottles for the entire country for this year. All right, let's go to the peated regular, which is sort of the silver tin. That's a peated 46%. And this is all barley that has been malted with peat in Scotland. And then it's malted to Amrut specifications, and then shipped to the distillery where everything else is done. So all of the process is done at Amrut, other than the malting, which they don't have the capacity to do all of that. So this in the difference is when they're malting, they're using peat to malt the barley. For Amrut, they're using mainland Scottish peat. So mainland peat tends to be more earthy, more heathery, more deciduous notes. You're not going to get that iodine, that saltiness, which you get from Islay, because Islay is an island. You get salt water. On the mainland, you don't have the salt water. So you're getting more of that deciduous. It's almost, you might pick up sort of like barbecued pork belly kind of notes in there, smoked meat a little bit, which is the kind of solid thing you get there. But it's not kind of the kind of peat that scares people off in most cases. So if you want to compare this to other peated mainland whiskeys, Ardmore, Lecheg, Ben Romick does a peated whiskey. Belvini, I don't know if they still do it. They used to do their peat week, which is that they're using that mainland peat. So, all right. So somebody that's good. Jared's saying, not a fan of peated whiskey. It isn't changing my mind, but it's not nearly as astringent as other sweeter, like a mesquite barbecue. Yeah. Yeah. And Jess is saying it reminds me of Ardmore. Yeah. Very similar to Ardmore in style. So
I really enjoy this. Because to me, it stands out. Like it stands out from the typical whiskeys I would be drinking normally, both for pleasure and for work. So this is unique enough that I mean I can't see it being a daily drinker by any means, but when you want that curveball, when you want something unique, when you want something off the beaten path, like to me that works.
yeah, well, I think if you're a big peat fan, you might make this a daily dram, but I can certainly say what you're saying. I mean, I think if you want a little bit of peat, certainly the fusion is something that you can have as a daily dram. But I like this. You like this shockingly. I get the barbecue meat, get salted butter. Yep. That's
So, I mean, I'm going to put Brandon on the spot here, and Brandon, chime in if you'd like. But when we met for the club, he was primarily bourbon and rye drinker. And to his credit, he's been trying all kinds of different stuff. And to his credit, liking and ending up liking all of those different expressions outside of just typical bourbon and rye. So I'm kind of proud of him for that. And this is exactly why we're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Michael. Like you've introduced me to new things I would have never tried before. And like I am actually liking this peat. Like I said, like, I'm shocked that I like it. And it is good. And I'm glad that I'm trying new expressions and getting exposed to different things. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, as I was saying earlier, this is when there's a differentiator from mainland peat versus Isla peat. So if you try something like this, like Ardmore, like Lecheg, you're going to get that. You're not going to get that big, salty, iodine, brininess that you get from Isla peated whiskeys.
Yeah.
So Isla peated, you either love it or you don't.
Yeah.
My first foray into peated whiskeys was in Lefroy Quarter Cask, which that was about 35 years ago, and it sent me on the path of saying, wow, that was where I sort of said, oh, wow, so single malt whiskeys can really be different. And really wanted to know more about that. So, yeah.
I have a buddy who tried it once and he said, what the hell is this? Iodine. And he never touched it again.
There you go. Yeah.
But then for everyone like that, there is an example like Brandon who does try it and ends up liking it. So but you're right. This is like very polished in terms of as far as the peat whiskeys go. Right. You've cited a few examples where like if you try that, then it would be like really taken aback. But this is quite delightful. I am looking forward to trying it at cask strength just to see like what the difference is.
Yeah. Well, why don't we pour the cask strength? That is in the green tin. It'll look like this.
Mm-hmm.
So 62.8. Now, remember before somebody asked about the entry proof. What was the entry proof? Anybody remember?
62 something?
Right. 62.8, which is what the peated cask strength is bottled at. Now, there is a rule in India that you cannot bottle something at a strength that is higher than what the entry proof was when it went into the barrel. So Amrut cannot bottle anything higher than 62.8. So this is not true cask strength. It is cask strength in the sense of that's the strength that went into the barrel at. But because of the climate conditions there, after 5 or 6 years, the alcohol strength in the barrel is probably high 60s, almost 70. Amrut in the past has done their oldest whiskey they've released so far is the Greedy Angels 12-year-old. This was 12 years in the barrel. It's ex-bourbon barrels. they were able to get special permission to do a mini of the cask strength, the true cask strength, which was 73.4% alcohol. And that was limited. They had to get, again, special permission to it. So in the presentation case, it had the full bottle, and then it had a little mini in there and a nice Amrut glass. But that is not going to be something that we will regularly see. So, again, when I visit the distillery, we get to taste barrel samples, and we're tasting about, at 68, 69, 70%, obviously knowing that we're not going to be able to bottle at that. So whenever I take back samples, they tend to get reduced down to 60 so that we can get a better appreciation for it. Yeah. So the peated cask strength, 62.8, 125.6 proof. Again, exactly the same as the peated you just had. So there's a measurement of peat, right? ppm, which is the parts per million of the phenol levels. That's a misleading number because 99% of the time it refers to the peated level when the barley is malted. So something like Octomore, for example, when they say it's, Octomore 3.8 is 280 ppm, that was the ppm when it was malted. There's no way it could be that in the bottle because you would not be able to drink it. Okay, so there have been some. We bring in a single malt from England, from London, called Bimber, and they just released their first peated whiskey, and they actually measured it, the phenol level, before bottling it. So they're one of the few to do that, and it said right on there, this is 14.3 ppm at bottling level.
I was going to ask you about Bimber, but we'll save that for later.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. I mean, I on the nose, I barely even taste peat, smell peat, and then on the palate, it's also like not really forefront. It's kind of masked in a very pleasant way. I really enjoy this one too. It's different from not cask strength version. Very different to me, at least.
Oh, it is. It's huge. I mean, this is my out of the core line of the 5 whiskeys, this is my favorite. I can drink this neat. I just think it's got so much to offer. It's just even at that high proof, it's just a lovely dram, just the way it is.
Yeah, and Jason there agrees with me too. He says cask strength seems to be masked by the strength, which that's exactly what I just said.
Yeah. So this, I mean, to me, some people might be a little more put off or scared by the 46% version, but this version, I think, because you don't get the heavy peat on the nose, you don't know what to expect. But when you put it in your mouth, you're getting that sweet smoke, almost like different woods give off different aromas, right? So you can tell if somebody's using like maple or cherry wood or something in their fire, you're getting that sweet smoke coming off of there, which is what's here. And this would be just great. If you're grilling and you want to marinate your meat in using this and some other stuff in there, that's just going to enhance the flavor.
Raj, Margarita wants to know, could you talk more about the peat process itself?
Mm-hmm. So peat refers to, peat is organic material. It is over the centuries, trees and plants and leaves and stuff have decayed and fallen into little ponds of water and continued to decay and filled up those ponds. So if anyone's been to Western Scotland, one thing you'll notice that is not there are trees, because you get the heavy Atlantic winds that have knocked over the trees over the hundreds and thousands of years. So because there's no trees, the people who were living in that part of Scotland did not have wood to use as a heat source. And there wasn't a lot of coal either, because it's a pretty damp environment. So they found peat, and they would you cut out, you can see if there's cut out little blocks of peat, and they use that as a heat source. The problem with peat is that it still has moisture in it. So when you burn it, you're getting some smoke that's going to come out of there because of the moisture level. So the distilleries in Scotland needed a source of heat to dry their barley. So barley has to go through an exchange process. So barley, you take it once it's harvested, you allow it to dry, you put it into a silo or a container and allow it for about 6 to 9 months to dry. And then you have to wet it to start the germination process happening, because you need that endosperm coming out of the barley that's going to convert, the yeast can convert it to sugars, to alcohol. But if you have to dry that barley, because if you continue to allow it to grow, it's going to turn into a plant, which means you got no energy to convert it into alcohol. So a lot of distilleries, you can use steam or hot air or electric or wood-fired, which really don't affect the flavor of the barley. But if you use peat to dry the barley, the smoke is going to cling to the oils in the barley, and you're going to get that smoky flavor in there. So the longer you dry it, the more peat you use, the richer, the higher phenol levels you're going to get in the barley. So hopefully that answered the question. All right. Yeah, and peat is something that there's always rumors a couple times a year. You always hear comments about, oh, we're running out of peat. I don't know if that's true, because it's something that continues to develop. Hopefully, I explained peat and the reason that you have it and exists. So it is basically a heat source. The bias again. So Mike's saying the bias would have prevented me from ever buying Amrut, but I'm sold. So by bias, Mike, do you mean bias of it being an Indian single malt?
No, I think typically Scotch or peated in general.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
I don't want to speak for Mike, but so he's confirming. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So Margarita is saying she's a Lagavulin fan. This expression is beautiful. Yeah, I think I love Lagavulin too, but I think that this holds its own. It's a different style, but it's something that's really, really great. And Fusion sort of sits in the middle, right? It has a little bit of peat. It has those typical Amrut flavors that we had in the first two whiskeys, and it bridges the gap between those two. And we got a survey up. So
So I was going to chime in a second. So normally, Raj, for your benefit, what we do at the end of these tastings, we actually send out surveys in real time, and it only takes 5 minutes, no less than that. Essentially, I ask people to rate every expression that we've tasted today on a scale of 0 to 10, and then we have a little discussion about that. And then there is a kind of curveball question in that survey as well. So, what's the future for Amrut? The brand has been around, you said, since, I'm sorry, I missed that. Since
2004.
2004,
so they celebrated 20 years.
20 years,
yeah, this year. And the distillery itself, 1948. So last year was their 75th anniversary. There are some special releases coming out this year. The Greedy Angels that I showed you, I showed you the oldest ever release was a 12-year-old. That there is another 12-year-old coming out this year. But about 5 years ago, I said to Ashok, well, you got to do something special for the 75th anniversary. So he agreed, and I suggested, why don't you do a 15-year-old Amrut, which is going to be unheard of. So they agreed to do that. They put a barrel aside and have slowly been watching it and putting it into older and older casks, because as you put it, it has to stay in wood, right? Because once you take it out of the barrel, you can no longer age it. Right? The age does not go up anymore. But you can put it into more inert casks, but as long as it stays in the wood. So they've done that, and they will be bottling that this year. There will only be 75 bottles available worldwide. We're getting 36 bottles for the US. This was my idea, so that's we're getting the most of it. And it will not be inexpensive. I'll tell you that. But we like, with the maturation rate in India versus Scotland, we like to say 1 year in Bangalore is like 3 years in Scotland. So when you get like a 10-year-old Amrut or a 12-year-old Amrut, it's like a 36 to 40-year-old Scotch in maturity measurements. Jason is asking, are there sherry casks used in the peated expressions? There are not. The peated expressions are all ex-bourbon cask maturation. But we have done single barrels of peated sherry or peated port casks that have come out that under the Atma label that I showed you before, the red label with the elephant on there. And those are pretty rare. I mean, there's, like I said, some of those we get anywhere from 90 to 150 bottles for the entire country, and they've got to sort of spread it around. So, yeah.
Your favorite expression, and I think if I know this group, it'll probably be the group's favorites as well, which is the last one, peated cask strength. I could see it standing up to a good cigar as well. It could totally be paired with a cigar. And speaking about pairing, what are your favorite food pairings that go with these fantastic whiskeys?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I think the peated, I will tend to pair it with. Normally with peated, I look more towards like salty, briny food, so like oysters and that kind of smoked fish. But I think Amrut peated lends itself more to barbecued meats. Grilled pork chops, grilled lamb chops, that kind of stuff goes well with it. We've had a number of Amrut dinners over the years where chefs have, we've shown the bottles and they've gotten pretty creative in there. I remember one in Atlanta, we had a chef who took pork loins and marinated them in Amrut fusion. And then he took the pork out of there and he put the wood chips into the fusion to let them soak. And he used the wood chips to smoke the pork tenderloin, and then took the fusion and made a sauce out of it to brush onto the pork tenderloin. That was quite delicious. I think with the regular Amrut expressions, you want to tend to go with a little lighter style fruit, but more food that has more sort of fruit flavors. So you do something that has maybe an orange expression, orange glaze or orange sauce to go with it. Probably duck with orange would work really well with the cask strength. That kind of stuff would happen. So,
got it. All right. So let me actually share my screen. Give me 1 second, and I'll share the results while I'm pulling this up, Raj. And again, this is primarily for your sake, because most people online have heard me say this a million times. Our grading scale is quite easy. And so we grade everything on a scale of 0 to 10, with 5 being an average, meaning it's an average expression. Anything below 5, you probably don't really care for. Anything above 5, you enjoy to various degrees. So, and when we select barrels, if it's a 7, very rarely do we really grade something above 8, right? 8 or above really has to be a standout barrel. So normally when it's a 7, 7.5, it becomes a selection. So with that being said, here are the results. So these are in order, right? In order in which we tasted them. So the classic one, we started in classic one. So it's, the average score was 6.1. We have 22 people voting, which is just about everybody who's online today, which is good. So that's a good sign. Again, you have to kind of keep in mind that this crowd isn't necessarily used to single malts and definitely not to peated single malts. So that's very encouraging, I would think. Cask strength, not surprisingly, fared better. Anything at cask strength fares better with us normally.
Uh-huh.
So
Yep.
7.0,
Right.
very solid score.
Great.
Rye was 7.7. I think this was by far the favorite of the bunch. There was only one score that was 5. Everybody else kind of enjoyed it, and then there are a couple of 10s. Most people landed on that solid 8. I was one of them. So it's definitely a standout. Fusion is interesting, 7.0. So it again, no scores below 5, which is great. I think as an expression, it definitely has its place because it's a bridge for people that aren't necessarily are peat drinkers. So it has a little bit less peat content than most, but that's the score for that. So 7.0 is a very respectable score for fusion, I would say. The regular peated single malt, like I said, I was probably in the minority. I liked it and I scored it an 8. But you kind of have the classic bell curve. There were some people that loved it. There were some people that didn't really care for it. So it's 6.6. Like I'm still to find one that's below 5 on an average. Which is a good sign. And then finally, peated cask strength. So 7.4. So this was the second favorite. I was a little bit off. Rye was the number 1 sample of tonight, and the peated cask strength was number 2. The curveball questions that I've asked were these: would you be open to Amrut private cask selection? I'm floored that everyone said yes. I really am, because normally those questions are split 50-50, but I'm very happy to see that this is a small sample size, obviously, but this is very encouraging. And then the next one was, well, okay, if you say yes, which expression? So this is an interesting and very telling, right? So the rye, I totally agree. I would love to see the rye at cask strength. I think the second suggested one was cask strength peated. My 2 favorite ones from today. So I would be really happy with either or one of those. The option number 5, I kind of put it there semi-blindly because I know you guys do secondary cask maturations and finished cask maturations. What would be the like if we wanted to go that route? I'm just kind of just humor me. What would be the options?
For peated?
Either or, peated or regular.
So with
rye,
peated,
for that matter.
Well, the rye, like I said, they're not making the rye anymore. So this is it. So you cannot. I mean, the one option you have with rye is to have single malt finished in the rye barrels, which we've done before. And I would not do peated in a rye cask because I don't think that would work. But the regular single malt in a rye cask would work at cask strength. As far as peated goes, I tend to think that sherry or port or Madeira or Marsala, any kind of like sweeter wine works really well with peated whiskeys. So that would be my my bias towards that.
Okay, got it. Okay, so I guess out of the top 2 options, one is not even an option because we can't.
Unfortunately, no, because we're not making it anymore. So,
okay.
There are a few. I mean, there's a few other things that are, some surprises they're working on, but those again are experimental. So we would not have the ability to do that. But I can certainly, later this year, I'll be there and I can bring back some samples and share them with you to see what you guys would like as a single barrel.
There are some comments here if you'd like to read them. But like they kind of range from not a peat fan to, hey, this experience opened up my eyes to new line of products, which is the point.
Wow, that's great. I did want to say I think Jason asked about the price on the 15-year-old. It'll probably be close to 5,000.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, with only 75 bottles worldwide, 36 bottles, and you'll never see an expression that old again from Amrut. So the 15-year-old, that's it. That's going to be the oldest expression ever, and we've already pre-sold 10 bottles of it. So
good for you. That's awesome. That is awesome.
But the packaging phenomenal. So, yeah, I want to thank you all. Thanks, Misha, for putting this together, and
Thank you for being flexible.
thanks everyone who joined us tonight. I appreciate, it's always nice to have people try something new and leave with the impression of being impressed by it, and hopefully opening your eyes, taking away that bias, and hopefully you will go out there and buy Amrut and support it. We really appreciate that.
I'm glad you've mentioned that. Yeah, I will add all of these 6 expressions to the Wine Spot website. When that's done, I'll send you guys an email, and you can go ahead and place your orders if you guys are interested. So I know a couple of people wanted to get their rye, so we'll definitely have the rye. For everybody else on the line, thank you for participating. You guys are making this an experience. Honestly, I mean, I could talk whiskey with Raj one-on-one, but it's a lot more fun with a lot of you online participating.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of I already have 3/4 of this year lined up for different tastings, spanning all kinds of different interesting things. So stay tuned. We'll announce the next tasting quite soon, actually. But tonight, I thank Raj for his time, for his expertise, and for being very generous and sharing this whiskey with us. Thank you. And to everyone, have a good night.